Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're gonna go over how I made this inside of 3D Code and then textured inside of Blender. So pretty much these are like really cool rock formations, and I had the idea that maybe we have some people living inside of these rocks, maybe some sort of like a civilization living in these outskirts away from the rest of the world. And I thought it'd be cool to have like a main character kind of just like going on his journey, exploring these places and stuff. Now what's funny, like the idea for this came from a Turkish drama that my mom was watching. She usually watches Turkish dramas that are dubbed in Urdu, which is pretty common in Pakistani culture, no, not gonna lie. But yeah, it was shot in the city or the region of Cappadocia in Turkey. These structures, these like cool rock and mountain formations, and within them there are little rooms and, you know, houses carved in, which was pretty cool to look at. So that was the main inspiration for the designs up here. So before we get started, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss any videos that I put out. I'm gonna give you 3 seconds for that. Okay, let's go. So before jumping into 3D, I always think that it's really helpful to just spend some time and sketch out your ideas in 2D. Lately, I've come to realize that I've become more efficient by having some sort of a plan before I start jumping in 3D. There were times in the past where I was like, okay, I'm just gonna do everything in 3D, just gonna make all my kits from scratch, you know, just go with the flow. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And many times you can't really like rely on the flow of things to actually make something cool. And so in this case, I actually went ahead and sketched out some formations, some rock formations. You know, I was looking at some cool shapes, looking at the big, medium, small shapes as well. Once I had some sort of a sketch sheet going on, I thought it'd be cool to just import that inside of 3D Code and just make something based off that sketch. Now, initially I had this image in the back, but got so distracting, like I'm not used to sculpting that way, so I ended up removing it. But for the most part, I started out with just a sphere and I used the move tool, just used it to kind of just carve out my shape, just looking at the big shape in the beginning for the most part. So not really using any complicated techniques, just going back and forth between the move tool and the cutout tool. And that's about it for like the first few blockouts for this piece, I want to say. And then once I had a shape of some sort, I decided to use the sphere tool just to create some of these little more circular, organic looking structures. And also going back and forth between the fill tool and the smoothing tool just to kind of like merge everything together for the most part. After I had some sort of a rough shape figured out, I thought it'd be cool to just add some detail. So I used the build tool and I clicked one of these preset stencils that come with 3D Code and just painted in some detail, you know, a little bit of grunge, a little bit of noise here and there to give the effect that this is a hard surface, rocky mesh of some sort. After that, I thought it'd be cool to just use the clone tool. With the clone tool, you can make a selection around your mesh, like different parts of your mesh, and it literally like makes a copy of it. So it doesn't make a copy on a different layer, everything's on the same layer. That way you can easily, you know, blend your 3D models, blend your meshes more seamlessly. And that's kind of like my goal, right? I usually try to spend a lot of time on creating like the first model of this kit, because what happens next is that then I can like duplicate that model and just reuse it in like other sets, if you know what I mean. It definitely saves a lot of time in the long run. Also, you kind of get like warmed up to some extent, you know, like after working on like one piece, I kind of have an idea as to what is it I'm creating and how far should I be pushing. Over here, I'm turning on my depth limit so that when I cut through my mesh, it doesn't cut through my mesh all the way through, just like a little bit. I kind of wanted to create those little openings where, you know, people can like probably go into this area, exit out of this area. But I wanted to make sure it's not like super deep to the point where it just like cuts all the way through directly. That makes sense. And honestly, if you guys watch my video on 3D Code, it was a very basic tutorial on how to use 3D Code, very basic tools. If you just watch that video, you should be able to follow along, because I'm not doing anything crazy up here. I'm just using like 2 to 4 tools to create this. And it's all about observation. It's all about sticking to your references. Also, you know, sticking to your shapes. Now, since I had a 2D sketch of some sort, I feel like I had a clear direction. Like I kind of knew the general idea I want to approach, if that makes sense. And so I did not waste any time just figuring out on the go. Also, the other thing is that 3D code can get super annoying. Sometimes without realizing your file can get like super heavy. And if you're just spending hours ideating on things that you probably won't even use in the final, then it's just a waste of time, You might as well spend that time figuring out what you're going to make, planning out things for yourself. Whether it's sketching, whether it's photo bashing, whether it's painting, whatever it is, Some people straight up just use photos and they do their thumbnails that way. I was trying to go for that route as well, but I thought it'd be cool to just do some line drawing and basic silhouettes. Also, I feel like it looks a little bit more, I don't know, I like the line drawing / silhouette look, especially in portfolio pieces when you're doing like breakdowns. It looks nice. Just to me, just a personal taste, I guess. So after I was done working on the first piece, I made a duplicate of that and I started working on the second piece. And just like that, the detail is there. That's why I feel like it's super important to just spend some time on the first piece of your kit, especially if it's something that's organic. With organic, it's a little bit easier to get away with your mistakes because it's organic, it's nature. But at the same time, it should also look believable. So, and I feel like you end up saving a lot of time by just constantly making copies, manipulating that, making copies again, manipulating that. It's kind of like how in Photoshop, right? When you're designing and iterating in Photoshop, you make a silhouette or you make a sketch, it looks nice, then you duplicate that sketch, you free transform it, you change it a little bit. Sometimes you change, if it's colored and it's photo bash, sometimes you'll just change the color of it. So it's the same process, just the difference is that it's in 3D. The other thing that it also does is that it keeps you consistent with your design. And you're not just making anything from scratch because the detail is already there. So you're being super consistent with your shapes, with your detail and everything. And then once again, I decided it'd be cool to just use the clone tool again and copy parts of it and just put it back on the new mesh also. So just like that, I'm like kitbashing while making a kit. It's one of those things. And honestly, as far as technique goes, that's about it, You just keep going back and forth with this. Rinse and repeat. I highly recommend you experiment a lot in this phase, especially since everything's on a separate layer. Even if you do mess up, it's fine. You can just delete that layer. So always be open to experimentation, especially during these early stages. So that later on, you don't regret not experimenting enough and your design just doesn't look that great anymore. Another cool trick is to also you can save ambient occlusion and displacement maps from Quixel Megascans, and you can use them as stencils also. And that way you get nice detail as well. For my next piece, I took a slightly different approach. I used a bunch of different cubes and stretched them out, cloned them, stretched them down, squashed them, made them small, make them big, kept cloning them, going back and forth. And I wanted to show that this is probably like a structure that's kind of carved inside one of those big rocks. So I thought I'd make these little buildings of some sort. And then from there, I used the stencils again, started cutting pieces up just to show that it's worn out, a little bit of wear and tear. And then I also forgot about the wax hide tool that I ended up using for this one. Wax hide is a really cool way to just, hide parts of your mesh. And then if you press Control and paint again, it brings parts of your mesh back. So that way you can quickly show some sort of damage and engravings of some sort. And then I used the pose tool as well. If you pair up the pose tool with stencils, you can also extrude out parts of your mesh, and it kind of uses the data from the stencils, and then it pushes it outwards. And once again, just using super basic 3D code tools, move tool, cut tool, move and cut for the most part, move, cut, and build. Those three tools are the ones that I use the most while making these. And especially with organic stuff, it's just so easy to manage everything, not gonna lie. And then I went ahead and squashed this piece down, and then I reset my scale to global space. So this kind of became some sort of a ground plane of some sort. And so with this, the 3D code process was pretty much done. And now I exported everything out into Blender, and I did have to resize them up a little bit because I feel like the scaling was off. Now when you do resize your models from 3D code, make sure you always hit Control A and apply your scale, because if you don't, then your textures can look a little weird. And that actually happened to me. So yeah, just be mindful about that. And so pretty much now, as far as texturing goes, I wanted to have a mixture of a rock texture and a sand texture. And after doing a lot of research on how to mix these, I figured out a way to do them. So let's look at my texture, right? So let me render this real quick. And I'm actually using an HDRI for this. I feel like HDRIs always give you like really nice lighting information. So if you look up here, I have, you know, a rock shader and then a sand shader. And so this part, all of this is a rock texture. You know, I've got an albedo, ambient occlusion, normal map, roughness, you know, mapping node, super basic stuff. And then up here, I have a sand texture. Now the way I'm mixing them is that I have a mix shader up here, color ramp, and this image right here, this is actually a grunge texture. And this grunge texture is pretty much driving the mixture between the two. And with my color ramp, I can like pull this slider left and right to kind of show the mixture between. If I put it all the way here, it's only the sand textures up here, and as I bring them closer to each other, that's where I can start getting that mixture happening. You see that? So that's how I made it. It was pretty simple, not gonna lie. And you can either use separate XYZ or this, it doesn't really matter. You just have to play around with it and see what's working for you and what's not working for you. And so pretty much I just use the same texture across the board for everything else. And honestly, at this point, it's just a matter of using basic Blender tools to just make more variations of the stuff that I already have up here. I'm straight up just gonna like make duplicates of these existing pieces, and I'm gonna try to create more pieces out of these. Now, the reason why I did not do this in 3D code to begin with is because, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes 3D code, the files tend to get super heavy if you have so many like polygons. And if you don't have like a very strong computer, you can just, it's a nightmare, you know, just trying to get that exported out. And also because, you know, I wanted texture inside of Blender anyway, so I thought it'd be cool to just do this final step inside of Blender. And I love using the hard ops add-on. It gives me some really cool results, especially when I'm doing organic stuff, get a lot of cool, happy accidents. So that one helped a lot too. And so I was pretty much using a combination of these models to either make bigger pieces or smaller pieces. And as you can see, the wireframe, it's pretty messy. There's still very heavy poly, which is also, I'm always using instances. Instead of using Shift D, I'm using Alt D so that I get an instance, and that way it's not making my scene heavy. Now, when I do merge them, I'm going to have an issue with it. So before merging them, I'm going to have to make those instances real. So that's one thing to be mindful of. And the whole point of this video is to just show you that just by using basic 3D code tools and basic Blender tools, you can make some really cool looking shit, man. Like, you just got to know your tools, right? And, you know, I've made another video similar to this where I was making some trees, and it was literally the same workflow. Whenever you're learning a new program or a software, specifically 3D, it's always a good practice to just limit your tools to maybe 3 or 4 tools that you'll end up using. If you're constantly going back and forth with like learning everything, you might overwhelm yourself. Now, as you keep learning more stuff, there will come a point where you'll eventually, you know, start learning new tools and everything. But especially if you're just starting out, just try to limit your tools. That way you can just stick to them and just make something cool out of it. And while I was kitbashing, I was also messing around with my textures a little bit more. The only messing around I was doing was mostly just pulling the sliders left and right. And I did change the sand texture to a different kind just to see the difference, but I didn't like it as much, so I went back to the old shader that I had going on. That's about it, you guys. You know, it's all about being consistent, and it's all about staying true to your process, and honestly just trusting the process, right? Remember if you go all the way to the beginning of this video, how weird and bad that weird mushy looking thing looked like. It was weird. When I first started this piece, I was like, man, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. But you know, you just trust the process, you keep going, and you know, just don't look back, just keep at it. And once again, you know, I cannot stress this enough. You know, try to do some sort of 2D sketching, some sort of planning before you do anything in 3D. I just feel like it helps tremendously with the final result, and you just don't waste any time. You can just tackle your problems head on. So after all that hard work, this right here is the final showcase of all my pieces from my kit. And I feel like we came a very long way from that one tiny little piece to like super huge structures and super small structures. And there's a part where you can like save it and then just showcase it on your portfolio. Alright, you guys, so that should be all for today. Thank you so much for coming by and watching this video. In the next one, I'm actually going to start building a whole scene using these kits that I made today. Ideally, I want to do at least 3 to 4 shots with this, starting with like an aerial shot and then an establishing shot, a close-up, and then an interior part. So that's the goal. We'll see if it happens, because many times I like set the bar way too high for myself, and then when I actually start working on it, it's like, oh my god, what did I get myself into, right? That's the goal for next week. So definitely be on the lookout for that, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.